Hello, goedenavond, hello, good evening. While other people is joining us, please welcome, welcome. There are a lot of places, seats over here and over there as well. Welcome everyone to Pakhuis de Zwijger here in cold, freezing Amsterdam, and everyone who is joining us online via live stream and documenting the danger to democracy. So this whole evening will be about journalism, about democracy and images. My name is Baram Sadeghi. I am a journalist, and as you can hear, English is not my first language. As a matter of fact, as someone who came to Holland about 4 decades ago, I have no idea what my first or second language is. But as long as you can give me the idea that you understand me, is that the yes? People in Amsterdam say yes, yeah. So that's enough for me. And enough about me. A couple of notes. Most important, tonight's event is organized by 7 Insider and for Hannah. Later on, during the course of the program, we will hear a little bit about the background of those organizations. To the other notes, of course, don't forget to shut off your telephone, please. And the other thing is that we have a photographer, Helene. So she's over there, and we really have to say that, you know, she's a photographer, so she takes pictures. So if you don't want to be on the picture, so please just raise your hand and she will delete that, and we will use those pictures for our socials in general. And other thing is, now you know everything about what we are going to do here, you know, as I said, the theme, the photographer, the telephone, even about my background. So let's see, you know, as we say in Dutch, you know, what kind of meat do we have in the cup? Let's see, what's the temperature in the room when it comes to those topics? You are a vegetarian. What kind of, thank you very much. By the way, me too. Yeah, okay. And so, are there any photographers in the room? Please raise your hand. Please, and if you are hesitating, am I a photographer? Then you are not a photographer. Please raise your, yes, thank you so much. Hand down. So, please give me an idea. Photographers, raise your hand. Okay, please, it's still up. Are there any journalists? And if there are photographers and journalists, it's okay. That's still with me. Okay, journalists. And are there any people who are one way or another involved in the politics? You know, whether it's local, it's national. I take it very broadly, but no. One person over here. Yes, one person here. So that's the politician over here. So then we know about the different types of vegetable in the room. So so I have now the honor to ask our first speaker to a stage to tell us something about one of those organizations, and also tell us about the need, about the sense of urgency. Why to organize this event right now? Not a year ago, not next year. Why now? So please, David Campbell, would you please join me here? And there is. Okay. Education Director at 7 Foundation. In a couple of minutes, you will give us a visual column. But before that, please tell us about 7 Foundation. What's that?
Well, the 7 Foundation has a lot of programs and projects. It now includes,
maybe a little bit closer to the microphone. Thank you.
We had this technical run-through before.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Nevertheless.
And it also now includes 7 Photo under its umbrella, but it has education at its core. And we have 3 things that deal with education: 7 Academy, 7 Community, and 7 Insider, which is the part of the organization partnering tonight. 7 Insider is the free platform that we have, where we try to aim, as we say, to elevate the discussion about visual journalism. And when we mean elevate, what we're doing is trying to talk about the context, the purpose, and the impact of images.
And how do you do that? Try to talk about it. How do you talk about that? In which way?
Well, we have regular online events, and importantly, we also have a blog that we've just started last couple of years, Dispatches, which is now on Substack. So we're trying to change the conversation and engage the conversation through those particular platforms.
Can we watch a short video about what you just said? Is it possible?
This is because we work in partnership with Photo Wings, and we want to just share a short video from them to get started.
Okay, start the video. David, the title of this program, of this event, is Documenting the Danger to Democracy. Why?
Well, when we're talking about the context, to me and to us, this is the most important context. We think that there's been a global trend towards authoritarianism in the last few years politically, involving a large number of countries. But in 2024, that's going to be tested like never before, because there are going to be national elections in almost 80 countries around the world. We've already had 3 or 4 this year.
About 2 billion to 3 milliard. 2 billion, is it in English, yeah?
2 billion. Yeah.
2 billion people are going to vote
yes.
During 2024. It's amazing when we are talking about democracy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At the same time, democracy is more than just about voting. After all, a lot of countries that have elections can produce dictators, quote, winning elections. So it's not a guarantee of a democratic outcome. But I think that what concerns us, and I think probably what involves the audience here most, is that really liberal democracy is essential for the cultural space in which we as photographers, journalists, researchers, and citizens interested in universal rights have to operate. And I think that that's under enormous pressure. And I think, in particular in 2024, that's a huge concern for us.
Yeah. I don't know how to put it, David, but if I look at you, we are probably the same age, Over there, gray, over here, gray. So we are about the same age. So is that really the first time that you have the sense of documenting the danger to democracy? Didn't you have that, let's say, when Reagan came to power, or when Ayatollah Khomeini came to power, or Saddam, or maybe George W. Bush?
There have always been threats and risks, but if you look at the global trend, it's in the last few years that actually the number of democracies has been in decline.
Like what? Give me an example of countries to...
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about some aspects of the US, for example.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, it's formally, obviously, a democracy, but there are some major challenges to that. You could talk about changes in India with the rise of populism and the nationalist parties there.
Yeah.
People in the Netherlands had a recent election in November. We could discuss the outcome and the context of that. Even in my native Australia, there have been populist governments that have adopted some of the trends that we might associate with Donald Trump and others.
Yeah.
So these things are widespread.
Okay. Before you start your column, your lecture, let's see whether people in the audience can share that idea with you, and maybe to which content. Okay? Nu komt de vraag. Now comes the question. Please really think about it. Paula, where are you, Paula? My colleague, yeah. Paula will come to you with a microphone, and Paula will not give away the microphone, as you can understand. So please speak in the microphone. So the question is, who thinks democracy is in great danger? That's the question. Please raise your hand. Who thinks democracy is in danger? Paula, would you please be so kind and go to over there? The lady over there, yes. In white, yes. Would you please stand up so she can... Yes, please. Yes, you raise your hand. Yeah, please, yeah. Of course you can sit, but I want to hear you. Thank you very much. So why? Why do you think that democracy is in danger?
Well, exactly, because the first thing is the thing you said already. The number of democracies is declining, and especially this year, it's in front of us. And you've also seen it in the Netherlands, of course, how quickly it goes and how vulnerable democracies are.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so let me see some hands about people who, thank you so much, about people who think democracy could be in danger, but it's not in danger right now. Some hands in the air? No. One person over there, the vegetarian, no, that, there you go, over there. That, yes, you. Yeah, please stand up so Paula can see you. So, please stand up so Paula can come to you. Yes, please, yes. So, would you please be so kind to stand up?
Yes.
Thank you so much. So you think democracy could be in danger, but it's not in danger. Why not? Why are you sharing the same idea as David?
Maybe not yet.
Why?
Because there are also possibilities, new media, new possibilities for people to speak out, to make a new democracy. So the old democracies, maybe they are gone.
Okay.
Maybe they will be gone.
Okay.
But there is also a future.
Okay. Can I come back to you at the very end of the evening to see whether you still have the same idea, or you understand, or our lecturers maybe can give you another perspective? Okay, that's the deal. Okay. Thank you, Paolo, by the way. And so, David, the floor is yours for the next, let's say, 50 minutes. Cool.
I'll do my best.
Okay.
So January the 6th, 2021 was always going to be an historic day. If we can have the first slide. The election of a US president is democratic, but it's a process of representative democracy rather than direct democracy. On the first Tuesday of November every 4 years, voters opt for one of the presidential candidates on the ballot. However, voters are in fact choosing members of the 538-member Electoral College, with different states in the Union having different rules and a varying number of electors who represent one of the presidential candidates. That means that Wyoming, the smallest state with 581,000 residents, chooses 3 electors, while California, the largest, with 39 million residents, picks 54. So US presidential elections are not one person, one vote. It takes nearly 4 times as many Californians to select one member of the Electoral College as it does Wyomingites. If a candidate receives the support of 270 Electoral College members, they become the president-elect. Congress then meets in a joint session to formally count and certify the Electoral College result, and that takes place on January the 6th after each presidential election the previous November. Certification has traditionally been a routine procedure. But January the 6th, 2021 was not a routine day. Donald Trump lost the popular vote and the Electoral College vote in November 2020, but despite and immediately declared the election rigged, the vote fraudulent, and the result stolen. Trump and his supporters conspired to overturn the election result, which is why Trump was impeached, and he and many of his allies are now indicted on charges of interfering with the election and defrauding both the government and the voters. The Save America rally at the Ellipse near the White House on January the 6th, 2021, brought together Trump supporters seeking to, quote, in their words, stop the steal. The rally had been planned well in advance and was attended by more than 50,000 people, many of whom had been bused to Washington from other parts of the country. The defeated president called on his supporters to march down Pennsylvania Avenue to the Capitol building, where Congress sits. We fight like hell, he said, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. Seven photographers, Ashley Gilbertson, Ron Haviv, and Christopher Morris were there. 7 mentee Christopher Lee also photographed on the day. Ashley went on assignment from the New York Times magazine, while the others went on their own accord to document what they knew would be important to record. And if you want to hear much more about how the photographers worked through that particular situation, there's this event that was recorded on 7 Insider only 10 days after January the 6th that's available on our website to have a look at. Trump's speech to the rally ended at 1:10 in the afternoon, and the violence at the Capitol had already begun. Many, though not all, of those at the rally followed Trump's exhortation to go to the Capitol building. Amongst those who did were armed white supremacist militias, including the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys. In the 187 minutes between the end of Trump's speech and his belated and half-hearted call for the violence to end, which he tweeted at 4:17 that afternoon, Americans in the world watched an unprecedented effort to subvert the democratic process as more than 2,000 individuals fought with law enforcement and forced their way into the Capitol. 7 photographers who were covering that were often assaulted and abused by the crowd, who saw them as, quote, enemies of the people, Antifa, and members of, quote, the fake news. Christopher Lee, who was wearing a mask to protect himself against COVID, reported that some shouted at him, "We know you're not one of us because you take the virus seriously." The 7 photographers also reported a surreal mix of chaos and wonderment, violence and carnival in the mob once they'd breached the building. Ashley Gilbertson likened it to the feeling that was evident when he witnessed Iraqis entering Saddam Hussein's palace in Baghdad. And nothing symbolizes that mix of wonderment, that sense of carnival, than the photo of the now famous QAnon shaman. Nothing indicates the paradox of US democracy more than the fact that this man, Jacob Chansley, is this year planning to run in his Arizona district as a libertarian candidate for election to the House of Representatives. Chansley can be a candidate despite having been convicted on felony charges for obstructing an official investigation. Chansley's case also demonstrates that the law has defended the democratic process, at least to this point. Nearly 1,300 individuals have been charged with crimes related to January 6, with more than half of them, including Chansley himself, pleading guilty. With the cases against Trump and his co-conspirators still pending, we're waiting to see if the ringleaders are held accountable in the same way as the foot soldiers. And the resilience of the law is best shown in this image of the photo of Eugene Goodman. Goodman is a US Army veteran who served during the Iraq War, was the US Capitol Police officer who diverted invading rioters from the Senate chamber during the attack on January the 6th. Goodman showed considerable restraint. He was forceful, but he didn't actually fire his weapon, something the photographers feared might happen. His actions also averted possible bloodshed in the Capitol building itself. I want to conclude, though, by showing you Ron Haviv's 2-minute film, Insurrection, which summarizes the images that he made on the day and the coverage of the January 6th violence. And as you watch this, I want you to ask yourself, what will we see next year on January the 6th, 2025? A return to the peaceful transition of power after this year's presidential poll, or another attempt to subvert the democratic process? Thank you.
Thank you so much, David Campbell, for your introduction. I would like to ask Mark Proust, who is a photography curator and researcher, to join me on the stage. Mark, where are you? Would you please go over? Yes. And maybe an applause for Mark. Yes, yeah. Okay, Mark. Okay. Okay, Mark, what are you going to do?
I'm going to have an interview, 2 interviews, in fact.
Yeah. With whom?
With Claire Wardle, who is a professor at Brown University and a leading expert in misinformation, disinformation, and public engagement.
Yeah.
And with Peter Berger, who's from the University of Leiden and the founder and one of the coordinators at News Checkers, a fact-checking organization, also founded by the University of Leiden.
Yeah. And according to my script, there is about 5 minutes room for questions after your conversations.
For Mr. Berger.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm going to sit over there, and then you start your own thing. Yes?
Thank you.
Okay, cool.
Thank you. Indeed, because democracy requires trustworthy information. And we're facing fundamental challenges to trust and truth in what is now our digital age. And that's because we're witnessing something new. Information pollution on a global scale, whether this be repurposed images, overt lies, or the rise of artificial intelligence. And indeed, I'm going to discuss these issues with Peter Berger, I just introduced, and with Claire Wardle, a professor at Brown University. And she is a leading specialist in the field of misinformation verification and user-generated content. Earlier this week, I spoke with her and I asked her, how important is the information system for the functioning of our democracy?
So it's fundamental, the idea that voters have access to information that allows them to make decisions that they believe are going to enable them and their families to be safe and healthy. And so I think we've taken it for granted that, of course, people can access information. And in the age of an internet, there's more information than ever. I think what we fail to understand that in this moment, democracy is under threat because people's ability to navigate that environment has changed quite fundamentally. And so whilst we think people have access to information, there's a whole host of other things going on, which means we're not in a healthy space where people can easily access that information quickly.
And when I read your articles, you also seem to have made a transition kind of yourself from trying to define misinformation, disinformation, and all those keywords to a different understanding of what the actual issue is. Could you take us through that trajectory that you follow yourself?
Yeah, so I think, any of us, I have a PhD in communications, any of us who think about these issues have known that misinformation didn't emerge in 2016. It has been a problem for a long time, and more recently, the Ebola crisis and other things. But 2016, with the election of Duterte, Brexit, the surprise election of Trump, and then this recognition that there were information operations, as they were called in 2016, there was this moment when we were like, oh my goodness, we've got to do something. And I think those of us who come from academic disciplines too often think about definitions and frameworks and typologies as a way of trying to make sense of what doesn't make sense. And now, in the last 2 years, I've had this recognition of very little of what I see fits neatly into any of these nice buckets. And I think the focus on mis and disinformation meant that we, those in our field, didn't think enough about hate speech or harassment or other forms of problematic speech. We kind of got obsessed with that, as opposed to recognizing the complexity of the content and the complexity of the people that are sharing the content. So we got obsessed with the disinformation actors, the Russian trolls or the 18-year-old boys in their basements creating memes. But we didn't think about the people who took that information, believed it, and thought that by them sharing it, they were preventing harm.
What then is the role, for example, of journalists and visual journalists within that, as they are not the creators of this misinformation or disinformation, nor the disseminators, but they do play a role in this ecosystem.
So this time 4 years ago, it was January 2020, and in the US, we were about to go into a big election. And the nonprofit that I ran at the time, we got funded to train thousands of journalists. We had this idea of if we train all the journalists, we'll be okay. And of course, it was helpful, and I'm glad that we did it. But 4 years on, I sit here and I think we now see journalists as one part of a wider ecosystem, because for the people who trust journalists, it's important that journalists have the right information. But for other people who trust the person who cuts their hair, or the person who walks their dog, or the person they talk to at the school gate, we also have to recognize that trust sits in very different types of people. So the role, I would argue, for newsrooms and journalists is to say, how do they become part of the wider community? If you spend time in disinformation communities, as I do, if you spend time in anti-vax communities or those who believe in QAnon, it is non-hierarchical. It is dynamic, it is participatory, and people feel part of something. They feel heard, they feel they have a sense of agency, and they feel like they can do their own research and share it.
Does that mean that journalists should be creating, I would almost call it like a counter narrative to make these connections? What's at the basis of it, of what they should be creating?
So the role for journalists, I would increasingly say, is what is it that your community is concerned about? What questions do they have? And are you effectively answering those questions? If we really listened, I think we'd be doing a better job of responding to people's concerns and confusion. And as a result, I think fewer people would be susceptible to misinformation and conspiracy.
What do you think the reason is that this has become this situation, that the people, let's say the QAnon believers, actually understand the internet, and that the vested institutions are still in the model of Life magazine? How do you have any explanation for that?
Not enough people, I think, give enough credit to the audience. I mean, how many editorial meetings are you in where somebody says, well, what about the audience? And it's not really what journalists want to talk about. It's like, well, I've got a story to tell. And if audiences like it, great, but my focus is on the story. It's an uncomfortable truth, but I think we have to struggle with the idea that there's this sense of we're the ones who have the important information, and if only people receive that information, we wouldn't have a problem. Whereas QAnon, it doesn't matter if you're the president or the person who runs the local bar or the person who, runs the library. Like, it doesn't matter really who you are. You come into these communities and you are heard and you are listened to because you've got something to say. And that is fundamentally different. Of course, we need an accurate historical record of events, but that's not the only thing. And I think this idea of like just more facts, the information deficit model of people just need more information, more facts, and we'll get ourselves out of this hole, is the exact wrong way to think about this.
Is there a final point you would like to make? I mean, for the photographers and the other news professionals, media professionals in the audience?
So, I mean, I think many people in the audience have children. If you spend any time with young people, their experience of the internet is 97% visual. Everything is visual. And to them, it might be a Snapchat photo that gets deleted. It might be an Instagram story, but they are very visual. I think there's huge opportunities to take what is a very visual, networked culture and to think about how do we respond in ways that we bring that connection, but we also bring the accuracy and we bring the quality information.
Thank you. And may I welcome to the stage from Leiden University and News Checkers, Peter Burger. Hi. And a microphone, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a seat, Peter. Peter, welcome. What's your reaction to Claire's call to journalists to engage more with audiences and communities?
I think that's a great idea, and I second that. But that's not what we're about. And I don't think Claire Wardle wants us to do away with facts altogether. Facts are still important, but not as important as many people think that they are. They are overrated.
Yeah, because she says, she does kind of imply that there's too much focus on accuracy and verification.
Well, I think we should be aware that facts are not the only thing for many people. If I'm allowed to give an example,
of course.
One of the pictures that I checked a couple of years ago, but it's still circulating, shows an Antifa member. Can we see that? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's the picture on the right, so you can see the Antifa logo on the guy's back. This was shared by a Freedom Party politician, PVV-politicus. I checked this picture. I found that it was a fabrication.
To be clear, a right-wing political party in the Netherlands.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I found that the original is the picture on the left, where you can see the same guy, but without the Antifa logo. And what I would like to say is that when I alerted this politician to the fact that he shared a fabricated picture, he said, "So what?" Because in general, my claim that Antifa is all about violence is true. So I'm not going to do anything about it because the message is true.
But isn't that exactly what Claire was also kind of aiming at? I mean, you can verify that this is a let's call it a fake news picture, disinformation, and at the same time it's accepted as real because it could be real. And is that where the audience engagement and the community engagement actually aims to try and, you know, tackle those underlying issues?
Perhaps. I'm skeptical about trying to correct the actions of people who reason like that. I have studied debates on social media, online discussions about the veracity of urban legends and crime stories. And when initially I thought that these would be discussions between people who either believed the story or were skeptical about the story, they turned out to be between people who either were skeptical, and they would ask questions, like journalists do, what is your source? Can you prove this? But the other party, those were not the fanatical believers. They were the people who reasoned, well, it could be true. So if there is value in the story, or if there's value in the image, if it shows the world as I think it is, it's a good story or it's a valuable image.
And is that also the reason behind why you initiated the news checkers to build this fact-checking?
We do not aim and we do not have the ambition to correct every wrong. But we do try to demonstrate how you could fact-check pictures or claims yourself. We criticize journalists who make mistakes, often honest mistakes, and sometimes less honest mistakes, as a means to improve the public debate.
So what's your procedure in that? How do you select the stories, the images, the reports that you are going to fact-check?
Many of them are viral images. Many of the claims that we check are made by prominent politicians or by prominent news media.
Okay, and then how do you go about? What do you have like a fixed procedure on how you check whether something is real or fake or misinformation?
Talking about pictures and videos, because tonight is all about images. One of the things that we do is we run them through some tools which help you to find out whether this picture or video has been published before. Because there's a lot of talk about deepfakes, and there's a lot of talk about AI fabrications, but the most common kind of disinformation that we meet is cheap fakes.
So cheap fakes.
Cheap fakes.
That's a new term for me.
A cheap fake is you take any picture or video and you just add a new context. So it's
can you explain what's a new context?
So say you find a violent video from something that happened during a riot in London 10 years ago, but you share this on social media saying this just happened in Amsterdam. That's cheap fake.
That's cheap fake, and you're saying that that's most of what happens are those kind of cheap fakes.
Yes, because at the moment, but I'm afraid that this is changing. Producing deep fakes takes too much effort.
Right. So that's still too. That's not a challenge. That's not the main challenge right now.
Not at the moment. No.
But it could become so.
But it will be in the future, probably.
And from the things that you check, what do you do with the results that you find? Do you have a certain procedure? Do you try and get it to the audience? What do you do with that?
We publish them on our website. We publish them on social media. During elections, we collaborate with Dutch news media, which provides a larger audience. When it's about news media, that we call the journalists and ask them why they produced this news item in this way. And sometimes
what are the kind of reactions you get? What are the kind of reactions you get from journalists who you approach?
Well, interestingly, like the politician I told you about, they will often say, "So what? This is a funny story.
I don't care if it's true or not.
Nothing serious, so we're not going to correct this." But sometimes, for instance, we fact-checked the story that, or the news that during the COVID period, 4 out of 5 Dutch youngsters were on the verge of a burnout, which turned out to be totally false. And this was corrected by most major news media.
What is the source of these kind of fake?
The source of this one was a so-called report published by a company that provided counseling for people suffering from burnouts.
Wow! And those cheap fakes. What can you name one main source? Does it come from everywhere? Well, how does that? Where do those images come from? And not the images, but the images and their new context.
They could come from anywhere. One of the things that we see during wars, so for instance the recent conflict in the Gaza Strip in Israel, people will for instance use pictures and videos from the Syrian civil war and say this just happened in Gaza.
But do you have any idea of what their reason is? Because they are committed to the cause, because they are activists, because they want to...
I think here the distinction that Claire Wardle makes is important. At the beginning of the chain, there is a so-called bad actor, somebody who knows that he or she is producing a fabrication. But then there are thousands or 10,000s or 100,000s of people who share that fabrication. Often with the best of intentions.
Right, based on good faith.
Yeah, based on good faith.
So what can we do? What's, let's say, the audience's responsibility here, or what is what can journalists do, and visual journalists and photographers, to prevent them to falling into these kind of traps? Is there a strategy?
Yeah, well, I would hope that, for instance, by means of education. People are made aware from a very early age that they shouldn't trust anything that they find online, that they shouldn't trust everything that they hear on the news anyway, and that they need some basic skills to do their own verification.
And can you give us some tips on how we could potentially ourselves, get involved into this verification process, or do we have to rely on institutions like your own?
Often you have to rely on institutions because some of these cases are really complex, and you need specialized knowledge to solve them. Often, one of the best things to do at the start is sit on your hands. Not immediately share this image or this video with all your friends. And often it helps to just wait for the comments to come in, where people will point out that, well, for instance, this video has been published before. In fact, it's 10 years old, and so on. And there are some easy tricks like doing reverse image search that I think anybody should be able to master.
Right, and that's something we should all do before sharing images or content online.
Hopefully.
What do you hope to achieve with your organization, with News Checkers? What's the goal eventually? I mean, let's dream big.
Making a small contribution to a more fact-based public debate in politics, in social media, and sometimes even improve the state of the Dutch news media.
And do you agree with Claire Wardle that we have a fundamental issue with our information system, or would you say that let's say in the Netherlands, where we are right now and where you are based and where you work, we still have a functioning information system?
Well, there is a functioning information system, but I see major threats, for instance, from the social media platforms. So good journalism is one solution, but I think legislation and increasing pressure on the social media platforms to behave is another one.
So for you, the main challenge is with the social media platforms who don't curb these kind of misinformation and disinformation.
Sure, but not just the social media platforms. Also news media who may overhype certain issues.
Right. So it's still functioning, but it's under threat, is basically what you're saying. And do you see that there's a bigger issue, let's say, in the United States? Or you're not in a position to comment?
But I'll leave that question to someone who's who has a better knowledge of the situation in the US.
But anyway, so there's work to do, and we can find more information and actually news that is checked by your organization on your website, News Checkers.
Yeah, right. Newscheckers.nl.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter Burger.
Thank you.
Are there any questions from the audience for Peter? Unfortunately, Claire is not available.
Yes, of course. Thank you. I see a bigger problem in losing the authority of journalism at the moment, and the social media overtaking the agenda. Is there any way that you see the balance being restored, or a new structure to be made in a society?
Yeah, well, good question. I think sometimes journalists may overrate social media platforms, for instance, by assuming that when something is trending on Twitter or on X, that is like a well-conducted opinion poll, which it isn't. So yes, I agree that there's a problem there, and that the journalists are not able to lean back and assume that everybody accepts their authority. I also think that it's a good thing that authority has been challenged, and that, maybe paradoxically, we're in a period where you can also have more sources of information at your fingertips, not just as a journalist, but also as an ordinary citizen, than ever before.
Right. There was another question. Lady in white.
Lady in white. Yes. Hi. I know we have many challenges, but I hear you say that we have to teach our youngsters not to trust anything on the internet, nor to trust anything on the news. So what and how do you teach them what to trust? And if they don't trust anything anymore, isn't that the bankruptcy for democracy?
Yeah, well, of course, it's difficult to find the right balance there. We want to encourage criticism. We want to encourage critical thinking, but we don't want to turn everybody into a conspiracy theorist. But I think by, for instance, teaching children from a very young age to check things for themselves and to ask questions like, how do they know this? Where did this originate? you could foster a healthy kind of skepticism.
Yeah, I think we have time for one or two more questions.
One question.
One question. Bottom is...
I reside in a field of journalism where most of our information resides behind a paywall. With an army of cheap fakers, do you think we stand an honest chance?
There is a kind of weapons race between the people producing and spreading disinformation and the people fact-checking disinformation and producing reliable journalism. Paywalls are a serious obstacle. So it's good that there are also news media without a paywall, and that at least in the Netherlands and for the time being, there is public broadcasting. Often I wish that all the news that I have access to, either because I'm a subscriber or through the university library or in some other way, will be without a paywall.
Mark, there is room for one more question.
It needs to be sustainable, so it needs to be paid for.
Yeah.
There's a challenge there for sure. There's room for one more question.
One more question. Final question. Yeah.
Final question.
What do you think we need to do with big bad actors? You mentioned the smaller ones, you know, people who just reproduce something they saw. For example, the Russians. We are all known nowadays that they are really kind of forcing and kind of pushing fake narratives. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a solution for something like that?
Disinformation produced by other states is, you could say, not in our reach. There is a mounting pressure on social media platforms from the EU. For instance, there is the Digital Services Act. We're waiting to see probably X will be the first test case, how this is going to work out in practice. The problem is that because of the globalized media landscape in which we live, on the one hand, there are so many sources of information from all over the world that we have access to. But the bad actors, and even at the state level, also have access to our information system.
Okay, Mark. Peter, I'm afraid time is up, but please leave your microphone on your. Yes, thank you. Would you stay with us, for a drink after the conversation is finished? Yes. Okay. So if you have any questions for the gentleman, please approach them. But thank you and thank you. Go. Well, responding to the dangers facing democracy does not require all visual journalists and storytellers to report on politics directly. Frits Gersberg, who is a curator at the Netherlands Photo Museum in Rotterdam, will showcase the effects of visual storytelling contributing to a democratic culture. Frits, would you please join us here? Thank you. Frits, you will have a short lecture for about 20 minutes, and we will see if you have time after that for some questions. Yes?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks to for Hannah for inviting me to speak today for this 20 minutes, and thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure. I was asked to select a couple of projects, photographic projects, of course, that deal with the idea and the concept of democracy. And I found many, more than I thought were there. But I chose 3 to show you tonight, and you can see them mentioned here. I have to say that the way that I constructed my presentation is different than you're seeing it now. It's a bit mixed up, but anyway. You can read the names of the photographers, Raval Milak, Nico Big, and Paul Shamroom. And when working on this little lecture, I discovered, also thinking about the question of how to address this issue as a photographer, as an image maker, how to address that. And I found 9 keywords that are very much related to the practice of those makers, to the perspectives they have on documentary, and the perspectives they have on their topics, which is, in one way or another, democracy, the places where democracy takes place, and the democratic process. So it's show, document, and archive. You will understand much better later when you've seen the images. Show means make transparent, show how things are working, what is happening. Document is, of course, very clear. It's like fix it in an image. And archive is keep it in a place that is accessible for other people. So it's more or less a kind of matrix, a kind of 3-dimensional model with these keywords that you can use when thinking about image and democracy. Witnesses, of course, has a long tradition in photojournalism, also to observe and to share. Again, you will understand better later on. And the other 3 words are study, preserve, and collaborate, which can also mean participate. Anyway, I will start with Paul Shamroom, an American documentary photographer who around the year 2000 was wondering about issues that were communicated by the government about exporting democracy to other countries in the world. And Paul Shamroom, interested as he is in his other project as well, in the notions of power and how these can become visible, thought, I'm going to use an existing database of little communities and some bigger communities in the United States, and I'm going to visit city council meetings. And the project is called Meetings, and he traveled thousands of kilometers with his car, making a complicated agenda, and so that he could visit a large number of meetings, local council meetings, which he decided to photograph in this style that you may recognize, but the images are not so good here, as a reference, if you're familiar with artistry, a reference to classical traditional history paintings, history group portraits, in this panorama style, frontal, eye level, with a medium format camera. He made this portraits of the people that were in the meeting. Of course, he asked them to have permission to join the meeting and to listen to what they were talking about. And he also recorded the agenda and the minutes, the notulen of those meetings. So you can see not only the people who are taking part in these meetings, but also the topics they were discussing, which may vary from the local, the status of the trees and the watering of the plants in the public space, to the reparation of garage doors and how much the community should pay the individual people with a garage door and contribute. So it is a series that, now you can't read this anyway, I'll go to the next one, where you can see, I would say, the common people, like you and me, trying to keep together the community, trying to organize the community, trying to solve problems, trying to keep the peace. So it's a part of the democratic process that is not related to presidents, prime ministers, ministers, political spokesmen, etc., but is related to the way just normal people living in those communities are practicing their democratic rights. And you can see that where the meetings were, when they were, but also how large the communities were. So this is, for instance, a community of 360 people. And what Paul said is that actually what the work they do, the labor they do, doing all the notes, the interviews with the community, trying to solve the problem, it's not different than the national government is doing. It's the same kind of work. Could the lights maybe go down a little bit so we can see better the images? It's a pity that you have all these gaps in between, because they're very nice pictures. So I think the power of this work is also that we can identify with those people that are practicing democracy. It brings us very close. It brings the whole process very close to you. This is the second project I want to talk about. What you see here is the photographer who is standing in the French parliament. It's a project about the democratic space, which is, of course, the parliament. And this is Nico Big, who is hiding under the cloth of his view camera, large format camera. And he started in 2011 to document all the 28 parliaments in Europe, plus the 2 parliaments in Brussels and in Strasbourg. And his concept was to be in the middle of the parliament. It's a place where normally citizens are not allowed to be. Just to be there as a symbolic place, find, of course, a good place to document either in 2, 3, or 4 images takes the whole space, including the place of the chairman, the place where the parliamentarians are sitting, where the people who take the minutes are sitting, etc., etc., and trying to be complete. We can make a little quiz here, if you can recognize the different parliaments. Maybe you recognize this one. But what you will recognize is that all the parliaments, if I go on, all have a different atmosphere. It's a different architecture, all based, of course, on the same principle, the agora from the old agora from the old Greece idea of parliamentarians collecting in one place and discussing the issues. And each parliament, although it has the same function, it's the same structure, has its own cultural atmosphere, cultural details that Nico Big wanted to document. And actually show us again the place where, in the heart of the democracy, where the democratic process is actually happening. He made a large book about it with all kinds of details, like where's the chair, where's the public space? It's on the balcony. There's always a public space. Are the parliamentarians, for instance, do they all have a fixed place, or can they choose every morning when they come in where to sit? How is the discussion organized? This is an interesting one. This is Malta. And you recognize, I'm sure you recognize this one. And you will also realize probably that he did his project before the Brexit. But I wanted to show it anyway because it's such a great example. And this gives you an idea of how large the works actually are in an exhibition. Where you can see at the left, it's an exhibition I was involved in organizing. At the left is a little part of the European flag that Rem Koolhaas designed. I believe it was in 2001 when the euro came. A huge flag that is supposed to be the symbol of all the countries together. The third project is very different. It's not a project by one person, although it was initiated by one person, by Rafał Milach, who is a Polish photographer and a member of the Sputnik group, a group of photographers. And what he did when the political situation in Poland was changing radically into a very much right-wing atmosphere, and all kinds of laws were changed, as I'm sure you know, as I'm sure you also realize that could happen here in the Netherlands very soon. What he did, he founded this organization, this group, this collaboration called the Archive of Public Protest, around a very simple idea with 18 photographers, critics, theorists, of photographing protest manifestations in Poland against the abolition of abortus, the free abortion laws, related to migration and refugees, of course also related to the war in Ukraine. and different other issues, and then create together, photograph at these events and create together an archive that is available for everybody to use, free of use. It's a kind of image bank as well. And publish also a newspaper, it's called Strike. I think there's 7 or 8 editions by now. And spread the news as much as possible, get people involved, and see to it that all the photographers that want to can participate in the whole project. So it's a project that is open, that is free, that is democratic, you could say, and it is a kind of counterforce, a kind of counter voice to the government, the Polish government that was until recently in charge in that country. And what strikes is actually that I think that the photography is so interesting. Is the image changing? Yeah. I think some images are moving around. So I took some screenshots from the website. There's also a website. Of course, the archive is totally digital, where you can find the images according to the different protests and the different topics. And you can ask for permission to download them for free and use them. So when you click on the images, or when you go with your mouse over the screen, then information will pop up. You can click further down the website and find interviews, find information, find publications in other magazines and media, online or in paper. So actually use it as a study tool about those protests and about the issues that are being addressed by this public archive. And I'd like to end with this image because I think it's the right statement tonight. Thank you very much.
Fritz. Just in case, maybe there is a question from the audience. Yeah. So are there any questions for Fritz right now? No. And by the way, would you stay with us for the drink afterwards? Do you have any time? Sure. Yeah. He says sure. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Fritz. Okay. In the very beginning of this evening, we introduced one of the organizers behind this event. And let's talk about the other organizer, Willem Poelstra, and for HANA Foundation. So Willem Poelstra, who founded for HANA in 2017, he was a former deep sea diver and documentary photographer. And so in 2017, he founded the organization. And unfortunately, a year later, he died from cancer. And the approach is very important. It's also personal background. So without fear for complex or heavy subjects, heavy issues, and providing support for creators and conducting research into photographic industry. I had a conversation with, prior to this event, with one of the people behind this organization, and he said, I cannot emphasize enough, it's about photographers, but much more, it's all about the deep commitment to the subject. That's very important for us. And in remembrance of Willem, for HANA organizes every year the Willem Poelstra lecture. And this year, the lecturer would be Jonas Bendingsen. Jonas, where are you? Yes, would you please join me here? Jonas. In the next 30 minutes, you will give us a lecture. And, I had the opportunity to really, in the last stage, to look you up and, your projects, for example, satellites about the former USSR, or The Last Testament about 7 men claiming to be Messiah. And your very last work, Yes, over there. Yes, the very last book, the Book of Veles. Do I pronounce it correctly? Book of Veles.
Veles.
Vele.
Veles.
Okay. Behind the microphone, please.
Thank you.
No, I know. So, how do I?
Some water.
How should I pronounce it correctly? Because it's from North Macedonia.
Yeah. Veles.
Veles, yeah,
Veles,
Book of Veles, yeah. And it was amazing what you did with the book, and what happened after the book. So
don't steal my thunder.
No, you are going to tell us what about it. So I guess now we know enough to give you the room for the next 30-35 minutes. Yes.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Let's see. I'm holding it upside down, so we'll go backwards. Something like that. Thank you for having me here. It's a great honor to be invited here. So what we'll be doing is I'm going to show you 4 of my major projects, spanning so the arc of my career, to show a little bit my own approach to my own work and thinking, and sort of the evolution that I've been through in my time, starting with my first big project, Satellites, which I started some over 25 years ago, and which it sort of feels like it's in an way bygone era, as opposed to today. So Satellites transpired between 1998 and 2005, and was really my first stabs at creating a story with photographs, and takes place in the sort of fringes of the former Soviet empire, which I was interested in for also personal reasons, because I have a lot of family history that came from this part of the world. I arrived in. It started with me actually as a 19, 20-year-old. I got a small grant to do a story, and I went to this town in the far east of Siberia with sort of the idea that I was going to learn photography there. I was going to learn Russian. I'm going to stay there for a year and see if this could be done. It was a strange thing, because I went on this kind of shoestring budget, full of restlessness and wanting to do this, and to try to make ends meet. I had written to all the film companies to see if they could support me with film, because I didn't really have money to buy those kind of things. And for some bizarre reason, Fuji granted me 400 rolls of slide film. And nobody knows why. So that was a very wonderful thing. The thing I hadn't thought about, of course, was that there was nowhere in 2,000 kilometers radius you could develop this stuff. So I stayed there for 10 months in this tiny town in Siberia, Birobidzhan, trying to create my first photo essay without seeing a single picture. And that's, of course, very different from how people learn this stuff now. But I think this informed me very much for all the years to come, because it really, for me, somehow just taught me that, pursue the story. Think about how you are photographing and the people you're meeting and sort of the framework around it. And I think that stayed with me as I later on continued this traveling around all these different enclaves and unrecognized republics like Transnistria here. All of the places in this project are really kind of places that are struggling to, one way or the other, find their place in the sort of chaos of the breakup of the Soviet Union. It's not a project that started with an idea even to make one project. I was pursuing all these individual stories that I was curious about and interested in that part of the world, and sort of later on realized that these small stories were pieces of a puzzle that sort of fit together into a wider story about in a way, the aftermath of the Soviet collapse. This is Abkhazia on the Black Sea coast, a sort of breakaway region that broke away from Georgia. Once I had sort of figured out this was one project, I started working more targeted on that. These are, in many ways, many of them are kind of frozen conflicts. Some of them are activated once in a while, like this last picture here is from Nagorno-Karabakh, which now recently, got very, very hot again. And we can see also in, of course, Ukraine, and this process of the breaking up of the Soviet Union is very much a work in progress still. The story is not over, and that's what this project really was about, shortly told. It ends with this chapter, which is kind of a murder mystery. The murder mystery is who killed these cows. I don't 100% know because I'm not a veterinarian, but what the local population in this borderland between Russia and Kazakhstan in the Altai Mountains say is that these cows were killed by spaceships. And the way that's supposed to work is that when you launch a space rocket up into orbit, it's just the very tip of it that ends up in orbit, right? The rest of it are these huge, big booster stages, 30 meters long, that come crashing back on Earth. You've seen all that footage from NASA, right? And that's why, among other things, the Americans launched their space rockets from the coast, right? So they fall in the water, or now Elon managed to land them back on some ships and things like that. Due to the nature of Soviet central planning, when they launched their rockets from Baikonur in the middle of Kazakhstan, these things fell back on land and actually into populated areas. So there's these areas that had space rockets come crashing through their roofs 3-4 times a month. And that was kind of one of the chapters in the story. Also giving rise to a healthy scrap metal business, which I was following, these kind of rogue Mad Max scrap metal dealers that were chasing after this very good metal and selling it to the Chinese for $1 a kilo. And I found myself in this very strange, very surreal setting. There were, people were still, traveling on horseback, but, picking apart spaceships for copper wire. And I was standing there, was like a beautiful, actually it was like a storm squall came in, and then it went away and beautiful sunlight came in. And it was just super visual. And then suddenly, out of absolutely nowhere, thousands of white butterflies appeared, giving me the most surreal and strange scene I have ever seen to this date. And I always think this is so strange because this kind of became probably my most well-known picture, but that entire magical, weird, surreal scene, I took half a roll of film. And this particular picture, I probably blew off 3 frames. Luckily, one was sharp. And it was just such a different time than we live in now, where everything is so fast and we produce so much and we take so many pictures. And it was, and in a way, I'm kind of grateful that I had that start in that kind of very economical, conservative film beginnings. And that kind of taught me photography, this project, in a way, and sort of formed the basis for who I became. But the funny thing is that even back then, I think I somehow didn't 100% trust photography to 100% in a way. Even though I started with these slide trays and very mechanical process, there was something about I had the suspicion that photography might not be able to do this job 100% on its own. The lack of context and sort of like I had a wish to sort of expand it from, see if photography could escape from its sort of two-dimensional and kind of like that very strict frame. I started experimenting with that in my next big project, The Places We Live, which started around 2004, 2005. Which started when I came across a statistic from the UN that said that some years later, in 2008, would be the year where the world's urban population for the first time would overtake the world's rural population. So for the first time in history, we would be an urban species, right? And at exactly the same intersection of time, the number of people living in urban slums would top 1 billion. And that was also projected to double over the next decade. So it turned out that sort of the urban slum, this informal settlement, was kind of the fastest growing segment of the human habitat, at least in an urban sense. And I wanted to explore that photographically. Somehow I had just become a father, and I was thinking, you know, a lot about how we live and how we populate the planet and what the world will look like when my son grew up. And yeah, so I decided to try to document that, and I started that in Kibera, which was one of Africa's biggest slums in Nairobi in Kenya. I knew this guy who lived there. I'd worked with him before, this guy Peter, and we decided to collaborate and see if we could do something. So together he helped me rent a room in Kibera here, and I stayed there to photograph what it means to be an urban citizen in the 21st century. And I was taking these pictures that were surely, you know, dramatic and interesting maybe, but I was kind of getting uncomfortable very quickly with the sort of notion that I was kind of cloning in a way, you know, all of the grand pictures of, you know, reportages of poverty and this kind of thing I'd been fostered up on. And I was just kind of copying the same visual mechanisms. And there was something about that bothered me, so I wanted to try something else. So I met this guy, Andrew, who lives in Kibera. And I decided to record him as a sort of simple interview. And I asked him, Andrew, tell me about life here in Kibera. And he started talking, and to my great surprise, he didn't mention anything about, you know, all the sewage problems right outside his door, the crime you hear about in this place, and the overpopulation, and all of the things that I was, of course, very much concerned with, trying to make a story about this. But he just started talking about interior design. You know, he was talking about why he chose exactly the blue color on his wall, and where he put his aquarium, and where he got the sofa, and what kind of texture he wanted there and there. And I was kind of baffled by it, but I thought it was kind of super interesting, because what he kind of taught me is that, you know, he actually wanted to talk about all the value he had created, you know, and his dreams and his ambition and all of this. And all of this was kind of contained in this dwelling, in this house, that was his little safe spot. So I tried a little experiment. So instead of just leaving it at this portrait of Andrew, I turned 90 degrees and took another picture, and that's the wall on the 90-degree angle, and you see his wife Anne and his mother-in-law making some food in the background. And then I turned 90 degrees to the other side and I took this picture of the sofa he talked about, etc., etc. And because this damn venue only has 3 screens per wall, I can't show you the last one. So that's that can be improved, of course, as a little tip. Not to get greedy here or anything, but yeah, but so it was about trying to create this kind of capturing this entire domestic universe in one image, so to speak. And I tried that with other people, and this is Charles and his family and his 7-8 kids that he lives with nearby. And again, all of these 4 walls, and, you know, interviewing him again and hearing his oral stories. And it became, in a way, a very sort of early stab at, in a very crude way, of creating a VR experience, in a way, a sort of more 3-dimensional, 360-degree photographic experience. I was kind of intrigued by that. And so we moved through all the neighborhood in this way, and it became a book that sort of follows this template, where you have the oral stories on the page, and then you could fold it out, and it became a sort of, you could create a little photographic dollhouse almost with this this room. You know, the thing I found in a place like Kibera, almost everyone lives in one room. So their entire life is situated within these four walls. So it sort of lent itself to this construction. And also a little bit of more traditional, reportage pictures added in for context, but sort of the driver in the project was this three-dimensionality I was trying to get at. So I decided to expand this to other cities, 3 other cities, to Mumbai and Jakarta and Caracas, and follow through with this investigation in a way of what normalcy means in these places, which of course from the outside looks very extreme. It's a very extreme life, but it was really about all the work people are doing to create a recognizable, normal life, and that was sort of like, for me, endlessly fascinating. I discovered so much about these places, like in Dharavi in Mumbai here. Like the BBC estimated at that point that the yearly economic output of this one slum was over $1 billion per year, in thousands of small mom-and-pop shops, recycling businesses, bakeries, clothing manufacturers, and there was so much going on there, which in a way is invisible to the outside. At least it was in my mind. So in a way, this project was very much about grinding down my own stereotypes of these places, because you hear the word slum and you think, all these connotations, all these often negative associations, and I certainly had a lot of those, and this was a way to sort of explore and be curious about testing those stereotypes. Who lives behind that cardboard sheeting under that highway bridge in Jakarta? Well, it's actually this lovely couple with 2 teenage children, and I was struck by again, family pictures on the wall, calendars, the kids' homework is on there. It's immaculately clean. They find a way to make wallpaper out of found stickers, and again, I was really left with a lot of admiration for the lives and the work these people put into, in a way, or to put it like that, what they really showed me is that, like, we all need shelter, right? We all need a house, but these people really taught me that we also need a home, a place to make into our own, to express ourselves, and that's really what this was all about. This is Caracas in Venezuela. Again, this would be an example of that sort of pushing and pulling on the idea of who these people are. So this is Carlos. He was a kind of a gang leader in one of these barrios up in the hills, and a frightening guy, according to his own testimony in the interview. He couldn't even remember how many people he had killed, and he describes the very atrocious ways this was conducted, and you could call him a mass murderer as well. And he was killed a few months after this picture was taken in one of these turf warfare situations. But despite all of that, there was something about this tough guy striking the classic tough guy pose with his gun in this setting. But he still sleeps on Hello Kitty sheets and puts his head down on a Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse pillow, and is surrounded by cute, warm, cuddly stuff. And no matter who he is or what became of him, there was something so human about that really struck me. Yeah, I learned a lot from that.
Once we were married, we lived
okay, here's 3 very terrible videos showing the exhibition installation I made out of this, which was kind of this multimedia experience run by 16 projectors running at once. So each of these cities had basically one room built out of rear projection canvas, so that the image was showing up from behind, and you could stand in the middle of it and basically visit these people life-size. and stare them in the eyes and hear these stories and really feel like you were there, and it was. I mean, I felt it was at least quite an experience. There was a lot of tears being felt in these rooms when people went into them, at least. Very terrible video recording of it, nonetheless. So, you know, I basically never start a project based on the idea that, sort of, oh, yeah, that would be a cool place to make pictures, or I bet you I could catch something there. You know, I think maybe I had a little bit of that when I was 20 years old, but not much anymore. And I think it's, you know, I am like everyone else, sort of absolutely weighed down by the weight of photography in the world. You know, I mean, there are different figures being bandied around all the time, but it's something like, you know, every day 3.2 billion pictures are being shared every day, 750,000 hours of video. It's just this ever-growing mountain of imagery, and that kind of bothers me as a photographer. You know, what's even the point of this? Why be a photographer? You know, and you know, the thing is, like, most of those pictures that show up in my feed, at least, they're kind of good pictures, or at least they kind of at least look like that thing we always have called good pictures. You know, and you all know what that thing is, right? I mean, it's kind of like the colors are nice, the moment was caught, decisive moment, you know, composition nice, all of those things. I mean, they're all decent pictures. And it's just like constantly running through the feed. And you know what? For me, it's kind of like it's like the problem isn't like everyone is talking about now, AI-generated pictures. The problem is that so much of photography might as well have been AI-generated. You know, it's kind of like, because it's just templated, regurgitated, the same again and again and again, and everything is resembling everything else, and it's all kind of good and pleasant and looking at it, and you know, we photographers, we have been the machine learning systems that have been eating our way through this training material for all these years and creating our algorithm in our head and spitting it out again. I mean, like, we are that machine, right? But this is not new, you know. This has been going on for years and years, and I sort of encountered this feeling a long time ago, way before, you know, OpenAI came out with their software, and you know, all through these things I'm showing you, this was, you know, going through my mind. What is the point of adding 20 more of my good pictures to all the other great pictures? Why? And for me, it's really, the solution has been to not compete in the realm of good pictures. You know, there's too many good pictures, millions and millions of them every day. But what you don't see millions and millions of every day is good stories, good ideas being brought forth through the use of photography. Interesting questions posed in a visual way. And I think sort of for me, that was the only way to hold on to this idea of making pictures at all. You know, I often say this, I'm actually not that interested in photography. You know, like I'm kind of half interested in photography. I'm kind of very interested in what you can do with photography. That I'm interested in. But for me, photography is really just a tool to explore things I'm curious about, things I'm fascinated by, questions I find mind-boggling. Okay, I'm able to find a way to get my hands dirty with them and explore them using photography, and that's kind of for me the way I keep going and find any meaning in doing this at all. So one question I was always very fascinated by from a very early age was faith and religion. I grew up in a godless home, you know, a completely atheistic family. But I, from an early age, realized that, you know, I had religious friends as a kid, and I realized that they kind of look at the world a little bit different than me. Their universe looks a little bit different. And I always wondered, what would it be like to experience that? What would it be like to believe? What can you believe in? What does it feel like? And I always enjoyed reading, you know, religious scripture, whether the Quran or the Bible or whatever I could find. And particularly, I was always very fascinated by the New Testament and how it ends. You know, this prophecy of surely I am coming back. This idea, you know, that the big weight of Christianity, right? At the end of times, you know, Jesus in some form will return to earth before the end of days and bring us into the kingdom of God. So the Last Testament, this project, which I started in around 2014, something like that, was really a way to explore exactly this question. And I Googled my way around to find 7 men who all claimed to be the second coming of Jesus Christ, claiming to be the Messiah himself, forming communities around them while making this claim. So I decided to go to the source and find out about God by going to each of these men. And that's a journey that took me all over the world, from Jesus of Kitwe here in Zambia and elsewhere. So, you know, it was really a question of, you know, where does the boundary lie between faith and delusion? You know, who gets to decide what is what? What is really the difference between the prophecies and theology of these people here and kind of organized, accepted religion? And so many questions that came out of each meeting with these people. Now, what is common to them all is that this is not some idea they had yesterday that suddenly they were Jesus and they were telling the world about it. But I mean, these guys have lived with this identity for years and years. Like Henri Cristo in Brazil here, he had this first revelation of being the Lord back in 1979, like these old newspaper photos show. And when I met him, he was a slightly more gray in the beard. But all of these people, most of them had the revelation of being the Messiah sort of back in the 90s. So they're people who have a long history of living with this identity and producing scripture and being out in public proclaiming this and collecting disciples and a community around them. You know, people who have left everything else in life to be with their Messiah and you know, work towards their cause. Yeah, and through this process, I also collected all the, you know, a lot of them produced their own scripture, their own written word, some in the tens of thousands of pages. So in this book, The Last Testament, I collected some of this and also brought their own words out so we can get a feeling of that. A lot of these are classic underdog types, you know, and in a way I always admire an underdog. You know, some are all over the internet, have YouTube channels and are quite kind of well known. Others I had to kind of deep Google to find in the local paper somewhere in some country. This is Jesus Matayoshi in Japan, a gentleman who had run in like 20 Japanese elections over 20 years as Jesus. And this was him on the election. Speaking of democratic elections, here he was on the campaign trail in Tokyo for a seat in the Tokyo parliament. Yeah, he finished. I mean, he never won a seat, but he in this particular case, he finished like 21 out of 31. I thought that was not so bad, you know. He got thousands of votes. Yeah. This is Moses. It's a little bit confusing because his given name was Moses, but he's Jesus, right? So people kind of get a little bit thrown off by that. He was actually the first Messiah that I met back in 2014. And I had just read a tiny little paragraph about him in a local newspaper in the KwaZulu-Natal province of South Africa. So there was not much out there information about him. So I didn't even know if he spoke English. So I got in touch with this translator in Johannesburg that I'd worked with before, this very hip young lady called Zandi. And we decided to go and meet Moses together and see if he would even speak to us. And so we drove down and we met him and found him in this concrete 3-bedroom house where he lived with his closest disciples, all the male disciples in one big bed in one bedroom, and all the female disciples in one big bed in the other bedroom, and he had his own sort of more regal setup off to the side. So he greeted us well, and we talked all evening, and you know, we said, but Moses, you know, we'd love to hang around for a week and see how you're living, and is there a hotel nearby we could stay or something like that? And so Moses said, no, don't worry, Zandi, we have plenty of space here. You can sleep with the girl disciples over there. And Jonas, no worries, there's plenty of room in my bed here. So I'm one of the few people who can say I've slept with Jesus for a week. It was very cozy. Here I'm reading my Bible as we're going to bed, and he's making notes in his. Yeah, it's that old Robert Capa thing. If you're not close enough, it's you know, that stuff. Yeah, yeah. So no, that was a great time. This was some of the most magical years of my life, actually. And working on this, I threw everything I know about journalism to the side. You know, I didn't use any of it. You know, I had no intention to go in there to try to investigate if this guy's Jesus or not. You know, I mean, my method was really to, with each of these people, I want to go, and I want to take everything they're telling me, everything they're showing me, as the whole and complete truth. And rather try to see, you know, what does the world look like from that perspective? What does the universe look like with those glasses on? And it was magical. It was really magical for me. In a way, this project really softened me up in terms of what you know, sort of. I went into it as kind of a hard type atheist, and went out of it just thinking, you know, for lots of these people, it doesn't really matter if it's Jesus or not. You know, they're getting meaning into their lives. There's joy. There's community. There's all these things. And if it's not harming anyone, then go for it. Yeah. Yeah. So it ends in Siberia with a former traffic policeman who in '91 had revelation that he was Jesus, and took a new name, Vissarion, and founded this off-the-grid community out in the woods of Siberia, where he was surrounded by some 5,000-10,000 of his closest disciples, living in this kind of off-the-grid agricultural community, which was quite special. He was actually arrested by the FSB, the Russian authorities, a couple of years ago. So he's held in jail still without trial. So what exactly will become of this community is very much up in the air. Yeah, there was a lot of amazing experiences in this, in terms of what you can believe in, and you know, about reality, really, whose reality is right, you know. And so I finished that project. I shot the last pictures of it, at least, in 2016. The book came out in 2017. But 2016, of course, was a year where a lot of things were shaken up, right, in terms of what you can believe in. And I'm talking, of course, about, you know, the election of Trump, etc. And that got me thinking about a lot of things, especially in the aftermath of the Trump election in 2016. I was sitting like so many people, a little bit worried, a little bit confused, a little bit pissed off, wondering what had happened here what happened to journalism, what happened to, we had all these new words, fake news, alternative facts. This was also the first time I encountered these kind of synthetic information, synthetic images, deepfake videos, AI-generated portraits. This all kind of came at the same time, more or less. And it got me really thinking about all these changes going on. And as I was trying to figure out what happened specifically with the election and the mechanics of it and the social media component and the Russian troll factories and the Cambridge Analytica scandal and all this, I came across a very fascinating story about what happened in Veles in North Macedonia, which is a sleepy town of about 50,000 people. It used to be an industrial hub, so there used to be a steel smelter there used to be a porcelain factory. All that stuff been closed down for decades. There are lots of youth unemployment. But there in 2016, a bunch of kids basically found a brilliant way to earn fast cash. What they did, it started sort of as a small event where some guys got together, they made a website, they gave it a URL that resembled an existing news portal. So they gave it names like NewYorkTimesPolitics.com, instead of NewYorkTimes.com. And they would cut and paste everything they could find of sort of wacky conspiracy theories, fake news, and just sort of sensationalist clickbait of all kinds. And they would make them into articles on this news site. And then they would put lots of Google advertising banners on it, right? So that basically it worked like any other newspaper works, right? That's how journalism works. You read article, you see advertising, the guys earn money. That's the mechanism, right? So if anyone clicked on this article, they would earn cash. And there was just something about the American public at that time, especially on the Trump-leaning side, but not exclusively, who was so hungry for this particular mix of clickbait and conspiracy, that the algorithm started firing up on it. Facebook and Twitter started spreading this out to first thousands of Americans, then hundreds of thousands, and then millions. And the guys in Veles were earning money. And then the neighbor saw them doing this and said, oh, wow, this is lucrative. So they started making their own websites. So at one point in 2016, in the sort of final months of the election, they ran hundreds of these websites from Veles, all kind of spreading out this kind of mix of weird junk information. Everything from Hillary's pedophile ring in the pizza parlor to Obama caught snorting cocaine over here in the Oval Office. And the weirder it got, the more clicks. It's this self-reinforcing circle, right? And it was a great success. I found this utterly fascinating because these young punks in Veles, they basically hacked our information systems, right? They hacked our entire ecosystem of social media, news, entertainment, social, and they were totally apolitical, right? They didn't give a shit who became president in America. They just wanted to, pay rent. So it was this really interesting example of the mechanics of information today. And they kind of became famous because Hillary was crying and calling them evil in a speech, and Obama, complained about these people as well. And so all the world's media went there, New York Times, BBC, they all went there to interview the fake news producers of Veles. So I was reading all of that, Googling Veles all over the place. And then I came across that Veles happened to be also the name of one of the most powerful gods in the pre-Christian pantheon of gods. He was kind of number 2 on the rankings, Veles. And he was a sneaky kind of guy. He was the god of chaos and mischief and magic and wild animals. And he was like the god of trickery, right? So I thought it was just great because he would probably be so happy about all the disinformation and lies coming out of this town that bore his name, So I was Googling Vélez and then came across the amazing story about the Book of Vélez. And the Book of Vélez was this ancient manuscript allegedly discovered in 1919 by 2 Russian soldiers. It's quite popular in, it was like these 40 wooden boards with mystical inscriptions on them that sort of were later decoded and found to be this religious, historical manuscript about the god Veles and the early Slavic people's history in Europe. And it's quite popular, in for example, Russia today or in these parts of the world. The thing is, modern scientists, linguists, historians have long ago concluded that this was a forgery. There was never any wooden boards, there was never any weird language. It was just an invention of these guys, a piece of fake news from the 1920s that is alive and well today. So I'm mixing all these things in my book. Contemporary Vélez photos, facsimiles of the English translation. It was translated in 1973 of this Book of Vélez. And headlines from these fake news websites they made there. Now, just one little tip to you all: when you're following the election this year, don't get most of your information from 365. What's it called? Dailypolitics.com. That's a very bad idea. Classical Vélez fake news site. Now that's 365 USA News. What was that? USADailyPolitics.com. Don't go there. But it's amazing to see how little has changed in America, right? All these kind of headlines with Trump, they could have been written today. So little has changed, and it's a frightening thing. So you move through this photo reportage, architecture, street scenes, depictions of this fake news producing scene. Now, the people who know this project, they know there's other layers to it. And that is, when I started this whole project, I was, like I said, fascinated by this idea of synthetic information, synthetic images. I was wondering, well, and we're now in 2018, 19, around there. How good have these technologies become? How easy are they to use? Has it gotten to the point then that an averagely nerdy freelance photographer like myself can kind of download some free software, go on YouTube tutorials for a couple of hours and see how this is done? So I decided to try that. Right? I downloaded some software that the kind of computer game industry uses to create avatars and objects for their computer games. And so instead of this picture of a fake news producer walking his dog on the hills above Vélez, it wasn't quite that dramatic when I got to that scene. Or this, a classic photojournalist dream, right? A shattered factory, broken glass, guy warming himself on the fire, kids running around, car wreck, maybe lives in the bus. Perfect, world press photo. Got all the ingredients. But it was a bit more bland, unfortunately. So all these images are just fragments of my imagination, right? The backgrounds are real. The backgrounds were actually taken in Vélez, but everything going on in them is just computer-generated gibberish. Yeah, in many ways, it became a process of sort of the exact opposite of what I normally would do, right? If I went there, try to get in touch with these people, gain their trust, make photographs. I wandered around and just thought, well, if Jonas Bendixen was sent here on assignment to make a reportage about the fake news producers of Vélez, what kind of pictures would I have loved to have seen? If I was standing here in front of this amazing monument with this heavenly god rays of sunlight coming down at me, what would be the coolest thing to see in the foreground? Well, these skaters maybe, and so forth. Oh, the bear, so this Vélez, the god, right? He was a shapeshifter. he would normally appear as a bear in the mythology. So I got to fulfill this kind of lifelong dream of being a National Geographic wildlife photographer by buying myself a 3D bear and having him walk around town. In a way, playing to the stereotype of kind of Eastern Europe, you know, bears walk around the cities there, I think. And it became a way to both pick apart the ingredients of my own pictures, you know, look at really what are the ingredients of my pictures, what cliches do I fall into, what tricks do I use to make my pictures, pick those apart and reassemble it with these digital models. Right? In a way, also a way to look at what is the language of photojournalism, you know? What do we want a story about fake news producers manipulating us in Veles? What do we want that to look like? Yeah? It should look exactly like this. Dark, grainy pictures, kind of mafia-looking guys manipulating us in communist-era apartment blocks. You know, the classic construction of a photo essay about something like that. And try to package it up exactly according to all those stereotypes and cliches. That was kind of what I was trying to do. So I decided to make a book out of it, and of course you need text in the book. And luckily, as I was sitting in 2019 computer generating bears, this was the moment when the first prototype of what we know now as ChatGPT really came out. The first kind of powerful machine learning and language model, which was then called GPT-2, came out. And you could access it through some Python scripts and stuff like that. So I thought, great, okay, now I don't have to write all this essay myself. Because you could kind of upload new training material into the machine learning system and have it write according to what you have input. So I took all of the English language articles I could find where journalists actually went to Veles to interview the fake news producers. You know, New York Times, BBC, Wired magazine, The Guardian, they all went there. And I created one long training document, which was like the master journalist goes to Veles document. Fed it into GPT-2 and had to write this 5,000 word long essay about my experiences in Veles. I didn't write a single word of it. Except that I generated quite a few versions and then cut and pasted the nice bits into a chronological narrative with background material, interviews, etc., etc. Same with these quotes that are through the book. I just isolated. Every time I saw in an interview that a fake news producer in Veles gave a direct quote to a journalist, I isolated it into a training document, fed it into GPT-2, and it generated then hundreds of these quotes that nobody has ever said, but mathematically speaking are the kind of things that fake news producers in Veles tell journalists. And some of them are kind of cool. So the book came out. That's kind of the short version of the book. And the plan then was to release it kind of without saying exactly what it was, to start sharing the material on my social media channels. And the idea was that because I had put so many breadcrumbs and hints that there was something wrong in this project, right? I mean, apart from the bears walking around, the text makes no sense at all and actually confesses to itself to being a fake and lots of other things. I thought, okay, it'll probably take maximum 2 or 3 weeks, and then people will be chatting on social media saying, have you seen the latest book of Jonas? It's pretty weird, right? There's something, the people look totally plastic, or like, I've been to Eastern Europe, never seen a bear, or something like that. And then I would enter into those conversations a little bit, and then of course there would be a little bit of noise and scandal, and then the truth would come out, and then that would be the launch of the book. And we could have this conversation kind of like we're having now about synthetic information. That was the plan. The problem was that the plan totally collapsed straight away. Because the only thing I got in return as I was publishing this material was thumbs up on Facebook, hearts on Instagram. People thought this was great. photo essay. Great reporting, Jonas. And I started getting messages from people saying, oh, well, I read the text, you know, it was, thank you that there are still investigative journalists out there doing a proper job and all of this kind of stuff. And I'm kind of can't believe what I'm seeing. And I'm realizing, you know, shit, you know, we really have a problem. At the same time, I'm realizing, you know, shit, I have a problem. Because I had not made a plan for this scenario at all. I mean, I could not believe that nobody would raise the red flag. And then, you know, the months went by. It came out in April 2021. The months went by. I wanted to test also if professional editors would kind of react to it, but I had a kind of red line I wouldn't cross. I wouldn't send it to any magazines or something like that, scared that they would publish it, you know, because that would destroy the credibility of both the magazine and myself. There was one legitimate target, I thought, for such a test, and that was the Visa Polemage Festival in Perpignan, which was, I kind of thought was legitimate because it's kind of an industry festival, right? It's the world's biggest photojournalism festival, for those who don't know, showing sort of big screenings on 70-meter wide screens. I sent it to them. They responded quite quickly, saying, Jonas, this is very interesting work. Would you like to have a screening at this year's festival? Upon which I said, yes. And got a very bad stomachache, which I had all of the summer, hoping that somebody else would catch me before it was shown scandalously at this festival in front of all the editors and my colleagues. Terrible things. At one point, I really had to get out of it. And I had concocted one plan to help extract myself from this deep hole I was situated in. And I did that through accessing another part of the internet I hadn't been too much before, which was the marketplace for fake social media accounts, where I bought. I asked them, give me a profile with a slightly Eastern European sounding name, and that's where this woman came into my life, Chloe Miskin. She came with a complete suite of profile pictures that the vendor claims. I bought her for $30. The vendor claims they were AI generated. I'm not sure if I believe it, but anyways, she's of course very beautiful. And the idea of Chloe was that she spent the summer of 21 infiltrating herself into the photographic community. All my contact list she sent friend requests to. So at the end of the summer, before the Visa Polemage there, she had some 800 industry contacts in her list, and she was, you know, commenting on people's pictures and being kind of a nice troll. The idea was that she was kind of a mole. So if nobody got suspicious about Jonas Bendixen, then she could kind of lead the horse to water. That was the idea. Which after Perpignan, I thought now it's really the time. I can't live like this anymore because this was very stressful for me. Late September 21, she comes out on the internet with grave accusations against me, saying not exactly what I had done, but that, you know, I was really bad news for journalism, you know, a fake news guy, all this stuff. Lots of discussion. She spends actually a couple of weeks trying to convince people that there's something wrong with this. Initially, they chase her away, you know, they don't want to hear from her. But eventually, I managed to move her over to Twitter, where they're more likely to kill you. And she had more success on Twitter than on Facebook. And finally, the truth comes out, and I can finally breathe again. Like most criminals, you basically want to get caught, right? So, and in a funny and really convoluted way, for me it becomes, you know, I'm quite happy, a sort of sense of mission accomplished, because afterwards, a lot of the world's media start writing a lot about not just my stunt, but about exactly this as a case for, like, how prepared are we for all these technologies that are surely about to wash over us? all of these technologies for automating production of synthetic imagery and synthetic text. And in a way, that was, of course, the initial motivation for this sneaky thing I did, was to really try to lift that up into the public debate somehow. And miraculously, somehow, that happened. The question is, where do we go from here? Well, this is maybe my proudest moment as a photographer, when I started computer generating embroidered bears. So maybe that's where we go, but beyond that, I don't really know, to be honest. I myself really confused, and I'm really trying to probe and figure out where the path ahead lies, and I struggle with it, and again, it's this thing of in the last 2-3 years there's been produced more photography than the entire history of photography before, and how to create something meaningful out of that. But I think for me, again, it comes back to this idea that I think we have to basically fight the generic. We have to think of photography in a context, and we have to think that sort of the only value photography has, in many ways, is when we can make it transcend from being pure illustration. When it becomes a thing of authorship, a thing of research, a thing of documentation, and transparent. In a way, it kind of becomes like the written word, right? Like photographs just become letters of the alphabet, and it's up to us to figure out how to wield that in a meaningful way. Thank you.
Jonas, thank you so much for your great lecture. And during the course of this evening, I made some notes. What's the takeaway, of this evening? People saying, and of course, I can tell you about, we cannot take our democracy for granted, especially not this year. Or democratic culture is much more than the right to vote in a free country, fair elections. Maybe the information system is broken, maybe it's not broken, maybe there are threats. But I guess the very fact that we can end up a lecture from a photographer who says that he slept with Jesus and created wild animals in North Macedonia, it might give us, enough hope and maybe much more inspiration for this huge global election year. Thank you again. Thank the other speakers, and thank you for being here. Thank you so much.